we're going to be having to do some standing up in this episode because we've got turtles of all kinds. And we've got one here that Joe's got on his, right in front of him. He's got to hold on to him because he's wants to crawl around on this small tabletop that we've got here. And this is a common snapping turtle. And we wanted to show you this guy because he's very common to see in roads around here with people driving around him. And you've got to learn to tell the difference between a snapping turtle and a regular turtle. So Joe, take it away.
That's right, Paul. So this one here that we have, you may be trying to go for a little walk here, it's actually a relatively big, common snapping turtle. And this is the one, like you said, you see on your roads, buzzing around, maybe find them in your backyard around here. Now, he's taking a look at me, right? And these snapping turtles are pretty big. They average, in general, somewhere in the 30-pound range as an adult. Now, not to say that they can't get larger or smaller than that, depending on where they come from. So, common snapping turtles, he's going to slide down.
Matt, can you get a shot of his neck with his head stretched out there? Because people got to understand how much neck that turtle has there, because people come in close because a normal turtle's head stays pretty close to his shell, but this guy can really stick it out.
Yeah, so he's moving around quite a bit here today. But yeah, this guy can definitely stick out that neck. We'll see if we can get he might fire it off at me pretty quick too. But this one, guys, is a common snapping turtle. Now, there are a few different subspecies of common snapping turtles. They range all the way from some parts of Canada all the way down and through a good majority of the United States, most of the eastern half of the United States actually, and even down into some parts of Central America. Now, this one is obviously a good representation. He's quite big and probably somewhere in the range of around 50, 60 years old. They can live to be into their 70s, maybe even longer with some of them. Now, you'll notice on the top of his shelf, I slide him down here for just a second, right? He's got some kind of green coloration, and that's actually not his skin color. That's actually algae growth on him. So a lot of times we think of turtles as being green, and quite frequently it's actually just algae growing on them. You're seeing a nice extension of that head now.
Yeah.
So their head actually is about half the length of their shell. So they do have quite a bit of reach on there. And it's quite the big head. So if you notice my hand next to his head, it's pretty similar. Yeah. They have some big claws on these guys too. Got a lot of energy too. So they'll be moving around quite a bit. That's why you see them up walking. They walk almost like a dinosaur walks, right? They're lifting that whole body up.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to tell whether or not you're dealing with a snapping turtle or maybe a painted turtle or a box turtle around here, right, is if you check him out, he's got a massive tail down there, right? That big wiggly tail down there. That is a key indication that we got a snapping turtle.
And it's got a ridge along there.
Yeah, he has kind of like a spiny ridge down along that. Their shell is sometimes described as spiky, but that's just not the case. A lot of times snapping turtles have pretty smooth shells, especially your common snapping turtles. But they do have little spikes on the back of the shell, but that tail is a really good indication. Now,
and there's another thing is a normal turtle can pull his tail and his head inside his shell, and these guys don't do that.
That's right. So snapping turtles actually do not tuck into their shell, so they're actually fully out of their shell. They don't have the ability to tuck that in, protect themselves like other turtles do. Instead, they're using that bite, which can be pretty strong. We got a little carrot down here, right? So if he was to come in close, get in there, right, and this guy was to get, sometimes he'll do it. Sometimes he's actually being pretty good right now. But if he was to try to bite anything, right, he'd use that mouth. So that mouth has a beak on it, and we'll see if we can get him to open up. I'm using this because I don't want to put my fingers that close to him. So if we can get him to open up a little bit in there, right,
there we go. Oh,
you'll see he's got almost like a beak as opposed to teeth or anything like that. Turtles have a beak and they have that tongue that's fixed down there. He's using that to eat his fish, his frogs, maybe some snails, stuff like that that would be crawling around living in your ponds and swamps. And that's really what these guys live on. They're not big man-eating things. If you guys are out swimming in a pond, right, walking around, you see one in your yard, it's not going to come over and bite you. I always tell people just give them their space, right? They're really neat. Maybe take a picture, right? But just kind of give them their space. Now,
Yeah,
they
don't
do
approach them from the front because any sudden motion they're going to be.
That's right. So they'll
looking
be
at.
scared, right?
Yeah.
So anything that's coming up on them, they're going to be a little bit nervous. So you want to give them their space, respect that boundary. And you'll also notice I'm picking them up quite a bit, putting them down. One of the most common questions I get about snapping turtles is how do I move them if I see them, right? So first, I always say if you're not comfortable with something, don't do it, right? Avoid them, let them be. They're a wild animal. They've been living in nature for thousands and thousands of years, not millions of years with these guys, right? But just leave them alone. And they'll move on, they'll do their own thing. But if they're in a situation like maybe on a road, a dangerous area, right? The best way to move them is, and you'll kind of notice, if I give them a little turn, well, watch out there, Paul, right?
Yep.
But what's going to happen is I have him, he's laying out in the yard. I'm going to reach down. I'm not going to pick him up by his tail because his tail is actually attached to his spine. It runs right down the center of his shell, and that's attached to his spine. It's a lot of weight to put on anyone's spine, right? So I'm going to use his tail almost like a handle, right? It gives me a little bit of control. I can keep him away from me. I don't want to touch the first maybe third of his shell because even right now where my hands are, he could probably get that head back and tag my hands. But this little back half of the shell here, pretty safe area. So typically what I tell people to do, grab that tail. I usually slide my hand right up underneath them, put it up under the middle of them, and just lift. Nice, easy, my hand's up underneath there. He can't reach anything. My personal favorite way to touch him, pick him up. Now, some of the other ways you can also do it. Some people aren't quite as comfortable with putting their hand under them. You can grab up underneath that shell, underneath the legs, and give them a big pick. Kind of hold them up like that, nice and easy as well.
And we'll just say, do not try this at home. This man is a professional. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been doing this for a very long time. And like I said, if you're not comfortable with it, it's not something safe. You can call animal control. And you can also just leave them, right? They've been moving around. They've been crawling through yards. They can get over fences. It's incredible to see what these guys can overcome. I've literally seen them myself crawl over 8-foot tall chain link fences.
Wow.
They're incredible animals. And they'll usually come out early spring. Usually the most common time I see them is that last week of June. You get a lot of snapping turtles coming out laying their eggs. And then you'll kind of see them again toward the end of September, doing the same thing again, laying eggs, moving around from pond to pond.
So they'll lay 2 clutches in a year. They can do
So
that.
they can usually double clutch. Not always, but they'll double clutch sometimes. Sometimes you'll have the ones that came out late laying again. And those eggs are really cool too. You can probably hear those nails like crazy down here.
Yeah.
But those eggs actually will spend the whole winter underground. And then the ones that you're seeing coming out early in the spring are last fall's eggs, which is pretty cool. But a neat little guy. We do have another snapping turtle to show you guys. We have an alligator snapping turtle, which is not found here in Massachusetts, but sometimes we think it might be.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess it's time for us to make that quick turnaround. We'll bring out the alligator snapping turtle, and you can see the difference between this guy and the alligator. Well, take a look at this ugly duckling. This is the alligator snapping turtle. You can see that he does look a bit different from the common one that we had out a moment ago. And tell us a little bit more about the alligator.
Guys. So this guy is what we call the alligator snapping turtle. And again, a snapping turtle. He's got that long tail down there, right?
Yeah.
Nice distinguishing factor of all the snapping turtles. And he also has like those big claws. He doesn't tuck in like the rest of the snapping turtles. He has a beak, just like the other guy. You probably saw that coming out. I'm a little bit more comfortable with this one. He's not quite as snappy. But alligator snapping turtles are distinctly different than your common snapping turtle. So one of the main things is that shell. that shell is truly very, very bumpy, right? It's spiked. It's got spikes down along the back down there. It's got that big beak that's going on up there. It's giving us quite a bit of action here. He's moving around.
He does look
right?
like a throwback to the dinosaurs, too.
Yeah, he looks like a
just that
dinosaur.
shell.
Yeah, a lot of the kids say that he looks kind of like Bowser from like Mario or something like that. There's a lot of characters that, right, characteristics of this guy that are very prehistoric looking, and they're really quite the unique animal. They used to have a pretty big range in the United States. However, now they're only found in the southeastern half of the, or smaller part of the country. And they're actually pretty close to being declared as an endangered species. And that's
Florida, Georgia. Down to, like, you know, the Everglades and the Okefenokee swamp.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, I think, maybe 3 or so species of these guys that have kind of been distinguished. And I think 2 of them are already protected, and the 3rd one's probably going to be added to that too. They have a pretty big range in size, so they can range from somewhere in that 30-pound range all the way up to over 100 pounds in some cases. And they have a crazy big mouth. So their mouth is much larger than your common snapping turtle, right? He's got quite the little range on him. We can use that carrot again that we were using earlier, but we'll show you. He's got that little mouth over there, and whoop, yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Right, that's why we're trying to avoid that, right, is he's got that little bit of a chomp going on. So, again, if he bites a carrot, no big deal. But if that was my finger in there,
maybe the snack
probably not
maybe
be
the
so
snack
good.
will quiet him down a little bit.
Yeah, keep him quiet, right? But inside that mouth, he also has a little bit of a strange linguinal lure. So that's a very different thing than the common snapping turtles that we have around here. So these guys are true ambush predator. He's sitting down in the mud. You can probably see up close there, his eyes are actually even camouflaged into his head. They almost look like they disappear. The inside of his mouth, if we can get him to open back up with that carrot in there.
It's a dark
brown color, right? And getting my finger there, right? But they have a very well camouflaged body, and even the insides of their mouth are pretty well camouflaged. He's gonna spit that carrot out. Not his favorite food on the planet, but
I thought he was gonna have a nice little snack.
Yeah, we thought he was gonna have some carrot sticks for dinner, but no, right? These guys will eat a little bit of fruit at home every once in a while. Give them some apples, give them some chunks of banana. They actually do seem to like them, but far less vegetation than your common snapping turtle. In fact, the common snapping turtle guys, they're eating the mushrooms along the sides of the banks. I've seen them kind of sticking their heads up and pulling vegetation off the sides. I've seen them eating lily pads, the buds off the lily pads, and some of your smaller, more like crustacean type animals as opposed to like your true fish. Not that they won't eat those too, but these guys are really fish specialists, and they do that with that little pink tongue that's in that mouth, if we can get them to open up again for us.
Oh, I see, just
right?
a little
bit of it,
pink
right?
in there.
So that little teeny bit of pink that's in that mouth is what we call that linguinal lure. And if he'll open up for us, right, he's gonna be lazy now, but he'll open up that mouth right down on the bottom of that. He's got that tiny little pink lure that sits down there, and it's
kind of hard to tell the difference between that and the carrot.
The carrot's next to his mouth, right? But that little bit of pink that's sitting down in there, right, is actually what he'd use to lure his food into him. So he'd be sitting down there on the bottom of a lake, a river, right, and he'd wiggle that little pink tongue around, and fish would come by thinking they're going to get a nice little snack, and this guy would actually clamp down on him. And that's how we get his food. So he doesn't have to actually go on an active hunt like the common snapping turtle. These guys are more sedentary. They're sitting down in that mud, really waiting for that food to come by. Now,
there's an alligator type of thing too, because the alligators are up on the surface looking like a log waiting for something to come by.
sneaking around. Now, that's the other thing, right? Speaking of logs, so we call them alligator snapping turtles, and that's the pretty well-known common name. In the southern United States, even in parts of their range, a lot of times they're referred to as loggerhead turtles.
now that
or
term I've heard.
loggerhead snapping turtles. Now, they do have a loggerhead sea turtle, right? It's a big grayish blue-looking turtle, but right, that's kind of like a slang name for these guys and something that's kind of referred to locally. Their true name would be like your alligator snapping turtles.
Yeah.
And they do have that big pronounced beak. They have a super rough shell. Now, on a baby common snapping turtle, which we do find around here pretty frequently, a lot of times people think they're alligator snapping turtles because on a baby common snapping turtle, they have a very bumpy shell, a lot like this guy. But that's normal as a baby, and they kind of grow out of it, and they lose that with time. So by the time they're about 4 years old, you really don't notice that bumpy pattern anymore, and it kind of smooths out. Versus these guys keep those ridges their entire life. They usually have a nice set of 3 ridges that goes right down the back there, and that carapace is really made to protect them. Now, on the plastron, which is the belly, right, you'll see they got quite a bit of skin, right, and that soft, squishy parts, so that's the reason they can't really tuck in. And it's the same on the other turtle too. But, right, on these guys you can really see it dipping his head back there.
Yep.
Just a neat turtle with a lot of really cool attributes. Now, the other thing that I find really fascinating with snapping turtles is the size of those claws. Those claws, right, a lot of people are like, oh, they must be for attacking stuff. And they're not, right? They're used for digging into that mud. They're used for crawling over stuff, but it's really digging down deep into the mud where these guys really feel safe and protected.
Yeah.
They have a kind of like a spiny tail down here, and their tail on all snapping turtles has those osteoderm type plates on it. And osteoderms are kind of like a bony scale, right? And these guys have pretty small ones. And as opposed to the common snapping turtle, they really have big spiny ones. The alligator snapping turtle has smoother, smaller ones of these, and they also have a much less scaly front feet here. The feet don't look quite as terrifying as the big scaly ones on the common snapping turtle. They have little fringes down around the neck that the true common snapping turtle doesn't have. And like we said, that head is much, much larger, but kind of a neat one.
Yeah. You know, I think there's something we should probably tell people and what to do if you actually get bitten by a snapping turtle.
So,
because most people want to take and they want to pry the mouth open or, you know, pull away from it.
Yeah.
That's exactly the wrong thing to do.
So one of the things I do like to tell a little bit about this. So one, right, if you get bit by a snapping turtle, it's probably a defensive thing. It's going to bite, it's going to spit you out and try to get away from you. Usually what I say is try not to pull away. So as it's going to hurt, right? It's going to be a big old pinch, right? But try not to pull away because that pulling is actually what's causing more damage.
Right.
So just kind of hold tight, see if it'll let go, and give it a minute. Now, one of the most common ways to get bitten by these turtles is with things like fishing, right? So a lot of times you'd be out fishing, you'd catch a snapping turtle, it'd bite your hook, it would latch on, and people try to do the right thing by removing the hook. You're getting your hands really close to an already agitated animal. In an ideal world, right, you see a snapping turtle coming, you'd get your line out of the way, right? And that doesn't always happen. And a lot of times it's an accident, right? That these things get stuck on your hook. And I usually say if you do get one on there and it doesn't get the hook out right on its own, because a lot of times they will. They have a super bony mouth. So you can see like all up along there is bone, all down the lower part there is bone. So these guys have a very tough, taking some more of that, right? They have a very tough, scaly section of that mouth that's actually protected. So they might just barely be hooked, and you might actually work that out on its own. Now, if it isn't like that, I usually say, instead of trying to put your hands in there, if you feel like you need to get it out, the best thing to do would be to reel it in, cut that line, get it into somewhere like into a box, maybe into the back seat of car or an SUV and transport it to someone like a wildlife rehabilitator or something like that. One of the wildlife centers that can actually get that hook out safely.
Yeah, and from here, there's the Trailside Museum is one of those places.
There's like the Trailside Museum, there's the New England Wildlife Center, there's a couple of them down on the Cape, and the state also offers, almost every state offers a nice list of wildlife rehabilitators that are a little bit more apt to deal with stuff like that than you or I might be.
Yeah.
So they are kind of a neat animal, something you might see around, but something that we really shouldn't fear. I also always like to say, like, if you're swimming out in the water, hanging out, there's not something that's going to come near you. Usually, we're not swimming in really muddy areas where these guys would be hiding out.
Yeah, we don't tend to like to do that too much.
Yeah, we tend to like the more sandy areas where these guys tend to avoid.
Yeah.
But you might come across one when you're swimming. You might come across one when you're fishing. Even out playing sports. I grew up playing sports right here in Abington, and we'd see them out on the sports fields every once in a while. They come out to lay their eggs in the spring, and the common snapping turtle will be out there laying its eggs, and we'd be out there. As long as you give them your space, guys, they're going to be just fine. We do have some other turtles here today that I want to show you real quick.
Okay,
And
I think it's
that's a
about
kinda neat
time.
one.
Okay, we will be back in just a minute with something else for you to see. Stay tuned. Now this guy is the red slider that we've heard about a little bit so far today. We've got a lot more to tell you about him. You can tell by the way his head goes back inside his shell that he's not a snapper. I mean, his head is out pretty much all the way right now, as opposed to the snappers, we could go out another foot. That's
right. So these little guys are a pretty well-known turtle. This is the red-eared slider. They, like I said, they have their body that can tuck into their shell. Also, if it flip them around, it's got a pretty tiny little tail back there, right? So you can definitely see that he's not a snapping turtle. However, he is probably a bigger problem than our snapping turtles.
Yeah.
These guys are a highly invasive species. I've traveled to quite a few countries around the world and seen these guys on almost every continent.
Where do they originate from, do you know?
So naturally, they're found in the southern United States, Texas type area, and Louisiana, some of that area. But it's now really, really hard to say where native and invasive ones kind of interlope.
Yeah.
Now, these guys are found in almost every body of water here in Massachusetts. They're found in bodies of water in Maine, and really pretty much everywhere in the United States, as well as almost everywhere in Europe, Asia.
And there's a good example right there of why they call him the red-eared slider when he sticks his head out.
So when he gets his head going out here, guys, right? He's got those little red patches that go down along the sides of his head.
There he is, coming out again.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's got those little red patches that go down and along there. Now, this one here is actually just recently came into me, but this was a surrendered pet. And being a pet is one of the major reasons these guys have become invasive so bad. They have found, were found in almost every pet shop in the Massachusetts.
These were the guys that were, when they were small, were about the size of a half a dollar, right?
So they used to sell these guys as like your quarter turtles. You'd see them, you got them there. They'd come in the little fish tank with the little fish bowl with the little bridge and the pine tree. The whole little thing going, and they sell them for a couple of bucks.
I had bunches of those when I was a kid because it was legal in those days.
They were legal. So here in Massachusetts, they banned them, I think, 2009, 2008, something like that. And it's a way to cut back on them. They've been pets for a long, long time. They breed relatively quickly, and they're breeding in huge numbers. And
they used to be painted turtle shells. You could buy live turtles with a painted shell in a lot of places.
That was another one. You'd get painted turtle shells, right? They'd paint little designs on them, paint them to look like superheroes, all that kind of stuff, right? Which honestly is a horrible, horrible thing for a turtle, any turtle. I still get turtles today that have painted shells, and we paint our fingernails and paint, right? But our fingernails aren't our whole body, right? You got to remember their shell is an organ, right?
Yeah.
It's part of their body, and their shell actually is pretty important for them for the vitamin synthesis. They're really sucking in that vitamin D through that shell.
Oh, yeah,
And-
so that when they're basking out in the sun,
yeah,
they're getting
so that's how they're getting
nutrition.
their vitamin D, and
Yeah.
that's how they process stuff. So by painting that, we're actually preventing them from being able to really absorb nutrients right, as well as that shell actually has the ability to kind of pass nutrients through it, breathe, and react. They can feel their shell. So when on the snapping turtles, you could see when I was touching their shell, they knew, right? So turtles can feel their shell. So a lot of times they'll actually rub up on things, get a little scratch. They can feel that. And their shell really does need to be treated like it's part of their body. So not something we want to paint up and cover. Back when we were younger and you've seen these guys in pet shops and they're painted and advertised like that, they probably didn't know quite as much as they know now. Nowadays, it's less common, but does still occasionally happen.
Yeah, that's a bony structure. That's actually part of their
it's
skeleton.
actually part of their skeleton, right? And the outside is made of keratin, and just like your fingernails or your hair. But the inside, whoops, making a run for it, right? That inside of that shell is actually made up of bones. And there's a little bit of a meaty layer in between there, like a bit of blood flow in there, right? Some veins and stuff to carry oxygen and nutrients out to that. Now, the other thing that I do like to say about all turtles, right, is if you get these as a pet, right, you get a little 4-inch long turtle, you're looking at this guy being probably around maybe 2 to 3 years old. Red-eared sliders can get up to about 14 inches, which is a pretty big turtle, right? And it needs a pretty big space. So to properly house just a single red-eared slider, right, full time, its entire life, you're looking at putting something like a 200-gallon fish tank, right, in your house. So a typical fish tank isn't gonna really cut it with a red-eared slider. And they can live for a very, very long time. You're looking at something that can live upwards to 60 years. So it's really
very
quite
prolific,
a long commitment.
Yeah, having that kind of lifespan with something that's this prolific, the population gets out of control.
It does.
And it takes over a lot of space that other animals would be needing too.
So here, what was happening was people would buy these guys, they'd have them as a pet, they'd get tired of them, and they were over-flooding rescues and groups by so many animals, you just couldn't house them all. So people were taking them and they would put them in like your local pond, and then the amazing thing
He's trying to get away from you.
he's making a run for it, right? The really amazing things with red-eared sliders is they're pretty cold tolerant. So these guys can tolerate our winters, the freezing temperatures, and they can also tolerate really hot temperatures for long periods of times. So because of where they come from in the United States, they have to be able to tolerate both. And that allowed them to really live in a very wide range of places. But they outcompete the native things, so your painted turtles, your spotted turtles, all those kind of turtles that we have around here that might only be able to live here are getting outcompeted by these. They're competing for basking spots. So turtles need to sit up in the sun and soak. The turtles that we have around here, like a painted turtle, might be 8 inches long, right? This is a full-size painted turtle. But you get a 14-inch big old red-eared slider coming up, knocking them all over, and then kind of taking them out. But just a neat turtle, but something we want to think twice about getting him as a pet.
Yeah. Well, we have overgone our time. We're late getting out of here now, so we just want to thank you all for watching. It was a great show, great turtles. Come back again for our next episode and see what Joe has for us to see then.